Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today thinking about pastures and ways to plan now to ensure that you're set up for a successful and productive spring and summer. Here's our Extension Forage System Specialist, Alex Rocateli.
Well, we got a good start in rainfall this year. We already got about 4 inches and a quarter of total precipitation. That's about double what we used to get based on our 30 years average. And that's pretty good for pastures, especially for alfalfa pastures that might start to catch up in growth to regrow in a month from now. So doesn't mean that the pasture, as you can see here, the alfalfa is still not growing pretty well, it's still kind of cold. That doesn't mean that we need to wait to start to do any management. We need to be proactive. Right now, soil sampling and analysis will be perfect. Keep in mind that alfalfa is a very high demand plant in phosphorus and potassium. Talking about potassium, alfalfa tends to take up more potassium than it needs. That's what we fancy say luxury consumption. And that has a problem because alfalfa that has high concentrations of potassium can cause milk fever in lactating cows. So that's why we need to apply properly. Now, what's the best time to fertilize alfalfa fields? I would say ideally for phosphorus would be mid-February, late February, before the plants resume growth. However, for potassium would be after the first cut. Well, but there's a problem here. We need to do 2 applications, and that might be expensive because you have labor costs, gas. Therefore, we can combine both in one application and apply late February in just one application. When talk about weed control, in my opinion, the best method is fertilization. If you properly fertilize our alfalfa, we are going to have a plant that can really compete against the weed. However, if you have a proper fertilization and you still have some weeds in your pastures, better that you think about control. Before thinking about any chemical control, better that you consider 3 things. First, the incidence of weeds in your pasture. How much weed you have in your pasture? Let's say if you have an incidence of 5 or 10% of weeds, that might be a low incidence. And if you spend money with herbicides, that may not return in more forage quality and yield. The second thing is the type of weeds that you might have in your alfalfa stand. If you have weeds such as dandelions and pigweeds, believe it or not, but they are not that bad. They won't affect the forage quality of your alfalfa. Finally, stand density is very important. Keep in mind that alfalfa is not a plant that compensates and fills gaps pretty well. Therefore, if you have a very thin stand and you apply a herbicide, you might be controlling those weeds, but the alfalfa may not fill the gaps and the weeds will return later. Based on what we have discussed so far, you realize that's a good option to go and do a weed control applying herbicide. Keep in mind that you need to apply a herbicide that is labeled for alfalfa, read the instructions, have a proper application in the correct time, in the correct dose, and always check for grazing and hay restrictions.
Hi, Wes Lee with your weekly Mesonet weather report. A cold polar vortex hit the U.S. this week, bringing with it some of the coldest temperatures the country has seen in a long time. Temperatures Wednesday in the northern plains were some of the coldest spots on the earth as the front moved south and east. Fortunately, Oklahoma only got a glancing blow of these extreme conditions. The lows on January the 30th had many of the northern tier of counties reaching down into the low teens and even single digits. Eva reached the lowest at 8 degrees, but Boise City and Newkirk were close behind at 9. January has had sort of a split personality when it comes to temperatures. Looking at this chart, we see the long-term average air temperature for January in the blue shaded area. The red line is the observed 2019 average temperatures. We see that the first half of the month was much warmer than normal, however the second half fell way below what was expected. There is good news for those of you who are ready for a warm-up. Forecasted temperatures for Sunday, February the 2nd, are expected to climb all the way up into the 70s, and the following week is also projected to be warmer than normal. Now here's Gary with information on some drying areas of the state.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, it was fun while it lasted. We went a few weeks there without any color on our Drought Monitor map, and unfortunately, we have a little bit of downy yellow starting to creep back in. Let's get right to that Drought Monitor map and see what we have. As you can see, down in far southwestern Oklahoma, in Harmon County generally, a little bit of yellow there. That's that abnormally dry conditions category on the Drought Monitor. That signifies areas going into drought this time. Sometimes this area is going out of drought. This time it's an area coming into drought, or possibly with drought as we go into the future. A little bit dry there. If we go to our Mesonet consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall map, we can see that area down in southwestern Oklahoma has gone more than a month without significant rainfall. Now the rest of the state, from 7 up to 3 weeks of rain or without rain, and then out in the Panhandle they're also getting a little bit dry. Out in eastern Texas County and also western Cimarron County, more than a month there as well. So we do have parts of the state that are starting to dry out, and we are getting concerned about those areas. So how have we done with January? We are wetter than normal for the most part. If we look at the observed rainfall from the Mesonet for January, we see less than an inch across western Oklahoma. That's not that concerning too much because it's a dry month anyway, and over into eastern Oklahoma the rainfall amounts increased dramatically up to more than 5 inches up in northeastern Oklahoma. So we are getting a little bit dry down in southwestern Oklahoma. It's something we'll have to watch as we go into the future and we start to warm up as we go into spring. Hopefully we can get some rainfall out there, head off any drought conditions, but we'll keep an eye on it. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Talking horses now, and some recommendations to keep in mind this time of year. SUNUP's Curtis Hare caught up with our Extension veterinarian, Dr. Barry Whitworth.
We're here with our Extension veterinarian, Barry Whitworth. And Barry, we're still in winter, but spring's approaching. And for those horse owners out there, what are some things they need to think about as it starts to warm up?
Well, probably the first thing that I would suggest is they probably need to take their horse, have it examined by a veterinarian, and we need to look at getting those vaccinations in those animals, things like Eastern and Western encephalitis, tetanus, a rabies shot. And then depending on what you're going to do with that horse, maybe if you're going to be doing some traveling, co-mingling with other horses, you might want to look at some of the other vaccines like influenza or rhinopneumonitis or West Nile virus would be the things that I would suggest that those owners take a look at.
What about when it comes to parasites? What are some of the parasites that horses, that infect horses this time of year?
Well, horses can get gastrointestinal worms, or they could get tapeworms. You know, probably the best thing that we could do there is, once again, have your veterinarian maybe do a fecal. We'll see maybe what the worm burden is, and then maybe we might need to do a deworming of that animal.
When it comes to the parasites or just some of the other types of illnesses, are there some common signs that the producer or that horse owners can look out for?
Sure, things that anytime we have an animal, we always look for things like appetite. Are they eating or are they not eating? If we were to go and mingle, you know, go to a rodeo event or some other type of event where we're going to have been with a lot of horses, things we'd want to do, we bring that horse home, you want to make sure you isolate that from the rest, and then you really want to pay attention to, do we see any nasal discharge, ocular discharges, Do we see increased respiration rates? We might want to check their temperatures to make sure it's not elevated, but these would just be basic things you might want to keep an eye on from after you've had this horse at some type of event or something. Because you don't want him to have contact with any of the horses on your place. And when I mean isolate, we don't want any nose-to-nose contact, so they need to be separated. And you want to make sure, like, you don't want to feed that animal, water that animal till you've done all the rest of the animals. I want to treat that one the last one, and as I said, watch for those signs that this animal is getting sick. Any type of nasal discharge, ocular discharge, appetite suppression. And again, if you want to take the time to check the temperature, if you get an elevation in temperature, that's a sign that this animal's got some type of infection going on, and we need to contact our veterinarian.
Alrighty, thanks Barry. And for more on horses getting ready for this spring, here's our extension equine specialist, Kris Hiney.
So if your horse has had a little bit of time off, I always recommend that you check a little bit of basic health in your horse first. So what shape are his feet in? Does it figure you need to be revisiting him before you start riding again? You know, if their feet have gotten long, they need to be trimmed because it really does affect how the horse moves, the length of their feet. Also, how tight, if they are shod, are those shoes still tight on that horse's feet, or again, have they kind of grown out? Because everybody tends to forget about, if their horse's feet are too long, it's really like you having the wrong size of shoes on and trying to get ready for an event. So we really need to think about their feet sort of the same way. So a lot of it is you need to decide what type of activity you're getting your horse fit for. Does he have to need to do high-speed activities, more endurance type activity, and also plan back from when is that event that you're getting your horse ready for, if that's what your goal is, because we need to give the horse enough time to make or develop fitness before the actual competition. So one of the things that I typically talk about when it comes to fitness with horses is try to equate it with, you know, people making that New Year's resolution of, I'm gonna go to the gym, right? And then you go to the gym, and what happens when you don't ease into it or you overdo it? You're sore, right? Because you've done too much. And we don't tend to think about that with the horses much, that, oh, they might be sore. And so sometimes when they're, you know, maybe a little cranky or irritable or not performing like you want, it may actually be muscle soreness. And we just always kind of put it on, oh, he's being bad. Check his body condition score, if that has changed over the winter, because one of the things that can affect is your tack fit. And you certainly don't want to make your horse back sore from any rubs or sores as you get started. It's always a good chance, you know, and especially at the beginning of a season, to do that baseline assessment. What does my horse look like right now? Sometimes I advocate taking pictures, because if the horse is being exercised, you should see like a better top line, better muscle development. So it almost gives you a way to check back and look to say, oh yeah, my fitness program is actually helping my horse out, or to take a picture and go, oh, he's lost a lot of condition, so maybe I need to think about that when I'm kind of getting my horse fit again. Our optimal body condition score for most performance events that horses are going to do are that 5, 5.5. Sometimes our endurance horses will be a little leaner just because we want them to be able to carry weight for a longer period of time as well as dissipate heat, but that 5, 5.5 is kind of key. Again, if your horse is over that, they're carrying extra weight, and that can be hard on their joints. You know, it's just you, same thing, carrying around extra weight. It's not going to be as easy to exercise, so we want them as lean as possible, but still having the amount of muscle that they need and the amount of fat and energy stores to do their event. And as horses change weight, again, it changes their shape, so to speak, and that can change how your saddle fits. So that's something that's pretty important to pay attention to. Well, we've started a monthly webinar series as a way to reach out to people while they're still in their home. So essentially, you can access those in 2 different ways, through Zoom. So I send out a link through Zoom. The advantage of Zoom is you can actually interact and ask questions with whoever is hosting the webinar. Our next webinar in our series is February 6th. That's a Wednesday, and it'll be live at 6 p.m. Dr. Justin Talley is going to talk about internal parasites and doing fecal egg counts to decide if you should deworm the horse or not. And then in March, it will be Dr. Candace Lyman from the vet school, and we're going to talk about breeding soundness exams in mares.
Last week on the Cow-Calf Corner, we visited with you about the long-term effects of a baby calf getting that passive immunity early in life. Today, we want to spend a little more time discussing the importance of that happening within the first few hours of life. You need to understand that a baby calf is born with an immune system, but it's just not producing any antibodies to give him some disease protection to those pathogens that he might become exposed to. The only disease protection he's going to get is that he gets from his mother's first milk or colostrum, or perhaps from a colostrum replacer that you have to give that baby calf in the case of one that doesn't nurse in time. The reason the timing is so very, very important is because the lining of the intestine of that baby calf has some cells on it called absorptive cells. They absorb those very, very large proteins, the immunoglobulins or the antibodies that are coming from the colostrum. Those cells slough off rather quickly after the calf is born. In fact, if you look at this particular graphic, you can get an idea that by the time a calf is 6 hours of age, his ability to absorb those large antibodies is down to only about 67%. And by the time the calf is a full day old, quite frankly, it's virtually negligible, the percentage of those large antibodies that he can absorb. You see, as that calf goes through those first few hours of life and he's losing those cells from his gut, and this all occurs naturally, then his ability to absorb the antibodies is also going down. You also want to remember that the first things that he ingests will also increase the loss of those absorbing cells. For instance, if we decide to give that baby calf some whole milk as the first thing he ever gets to drink or eat, that will increase the loss of those cells and therefore decrease his ability to absorb the antibodies. That's why it's so important that the first meal that baby calf receives is colostrum, or is one of the colostrum replacers that has those antibodies in it that gives him the ability to get that into his bloodstream and get some passive immunity. Then after that, we want to come back with a second dose about 12 hours later if we're needing to hand feed the calf, so that we get as much of those antibodies into him in the first 2 feedings as possible. I hope this helps you understand a little more of why we say that first 6 hours is so important for that baby calf to get the colostrum and those antibodies that he needs to get some disease protection that'll help him not only fend off something like calf diarrhea in the first few weeks of life, but also then appears to be helpful to him in terms of fending off diseases all the way through his productive lifetime. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
We're here now with Derrell Peel, our Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist. And Derrell, let's kind of start off with this Arctic blast that everybody's talking about the past few days and how that might be impacting cattle and cattle markets.
You know, it's a large area covered by this, and it will have some impacts. Obviously, it creates a lot of management headaches for cattle in all situations, whether it's cow-calf or stocker or in the feedlot. So individual producers will certainly be dealing with this. What we're watching, of course, is whether that translates into market impacts. And so, you know, with these kind of conditions, deep snow in some cases, muddy conditions, or at least it was mud before it froze. And so that affects cattle performance. That can translate into lighter carcass weights and disruptions in the movement of cattle to market. And so, you know, we'll be watching to see how much impact that has on the supply side of the industry.
Do you anticipate any impact on demand as a result?
It can impact demand. You know, when we have a situation, obviously this covers a lot of major population areas. So when you disrupt travel for people, and just the cold temperatures and the snowy conditions, folks hunker down. They still eat, but they don't eat the same way they would normally. So it can disrupt restaurant traffic. So we can see some demand impacts, and that makes it really hard to sort of balance the supply disruptions versus the demand to figure out sort of what the net impact is. It's something we'll have to watch.
A myriad of things happening. How long do you anticipate these impacts to last?
Well, you know, in some cases, when we have these disruptions, if they're big enough and sort of prolonged enough in terms of the event, then the tail of that can last several weeks. So again, it's something we'll have to watch going forward. We may set up, and of course it's wintertime, we've got some winter weather ahead of us. So if we stack this against some other winter weather going forward, we could see significant impacts for several weeks on out into almost into the springtime, depending on the situation.
Let's talk about data now and the government reopening and what that means in terms of some of the other analysis that you and colleagues do.
Well, you know, we do have the government back open, so we're trying to get back on track. We're still trying to figure out exactly how we will resume data. Some data will probably get skipped, and there's questions about exactly how that data will be released. And so it plays into our previous discussion in terms of trying to track these winter weather impacts. You know, we finished up January now. We're really still trying to get a beat on sort of where the New Year's markets are, and we didn't have that data for a while. So the data issues will persist for a little while, but hopefully we're back on track now so that we can begin to be able to see these things on a more timely basis.
Let's hope. Okay, Derrell Peel, thanks a lot. We'll see you again soon.
Occasionally, people will say that the FDA allows bugs in our food. It's something they hear on Facebook, Twitter, somewhere on the internet. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. What these stories are referring to are food defect action levels that the FDA has established for different kinds of food. In other words, these are maximum levels of natural or unavoidable defects in human foods that present no health hazards. Foods that exceed these levels are subject to action by the FDA. Something else that's important to remember is that if a food is actually harmful to a consumer, the FDA is going to act whether or not that food exceeds any sort of food defect action level. That's also important to keep in mind. These levels aren't for things that are kind of shocking, insect parts or rodent hair, but they're also for things like sticks, stones, stems, soil, just to name a few other defects. So that's a little bit of the reasoning behind why the FDA has set these food defect action levels. It's also important to remember that many food companies have their own quality standards that are much more strict. And if you're still grossed out, something important to remember is that before there was ever an FDA, people were still eating food and everything that came along with it. If you want more information, visit fapc.biz or sunup.okstate.edu.
So many times on the show we talk about the Black Sea region, and that's really Russia, Kazakhstan, and the Ukraine. But Kim, they've increased their exports over the past few years, but by how much?
Well, let's set a foundation with the world. You go back to the marketing year 2000 and 2001, world wheat exports were 4.17 billion bushels. This year they're projected to be 6.66 billion bushels, or about a 2.5 billion bushel increase. Now, if you look over that same time period, Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan increased their exports by 2.2 billion bushels, or 88% of that. Looking down, Russia in 2000, their exports were 19 million bushels. This year they're projected to be 1.34 billion bushels. If you look at the Ukraine, their exports in 2000 was 72 million, 606 million bushels this year. Kazakhstan, not as big an increase, but from 239 million bushels to 312. So if you look at the increase in wheat exports since 2000, 88% of that's out of the Black Sea region.
How did they really corner that market?
Well, if you look at it, they improved the infrastructure. They allowed outside investments. They came in, they improved their production practices with better technology, better availability of fertilizers and seed, and especially better equipment. They spent billions of dollars in rebuilding the road system, the transportation system of trucking and rail, the storage system for storing that wheat. And then in some cases they've tripled their capacity at exports in overall areas, increased the efficiency of exports.
How much of, I don't know, of ocean advantage, I guess, is there for the Black Sea countries?
Well, let's just look in going into Egypt, which used to be the United States' #1 importer of wheat, and Egypt imports 7% of the world's wheat. It cost Russia about 41 cents ocean freight from the Black Sea into Egypt. It cost us about 82, us, United States, Canada, Argentina, about 82 cents going in that. So what they've got, Russia's got a transportation advantage into the #1 region, that's the North African, from Egypt to Morocco. That's 16% of the world wheat imports right there. They've got a transportation advantage into the Middle East, which is another 15%. In other words, they got a significant transportation advantage of going into 31% of the world's wheat market.
So what happened to all the wheat from all the other countries that are exporting?
Well, if you'll look at from 2001 to current, Argentina's percentage of the hard wheat exports in the world went from 15% down to 11%, Australia from 24 to 8%, Canada from 26 to 19%, and the United States 23 down to 13%. Those countries, the major countries here, Argentina, Australia, Canada, and the United States, percent of the world hard wheat exports went from 88% down to 51%. We saw Russia's go from 12 to 40, or not Russia's, but the Black Sea area, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, go from 12% to 49% of the world's hard wheat exports. Canada has essentially either out of Thunder Bay or out of Vancouver, Victoria, equal transportation costs, so we have to compete with them. And then you've got Australia coming into these also. The only market that the United States has a transportation advantage is Mexico.
Okay, thank you much. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.